Okay, we have enough staff on, Neil, to go ahead and call the meeting to order?
We do, Councillor.
Okay, so welcome everybody at this October 26th work session. I'd like to call the meeting to order with a roll call attendance.
Councillors Van Gordon.
Here.
Moe.
Here.
Moore.
Here.
Hare.
Here.
Woodrow.
Here.
Missionary.
Here. So go ahead and go with the first topic is Whitebird Outreach Team Report with Emily David.
And Councillor Emily David will not be here this evening, but I'm happy to introduce Alex Farmer. Alex is the front room coordinator for the Whitebird Clinic and is managing the outreach efforts to the unhoused through a contract the City Emergency Operations Center initiated late in May of 2020 in response to the Oregon Executive 20-12 stay at home, stay safe order. And we have 15 minutes for this agenda item. And I believe, Alex, you are here.
I am here, yes.
Okay, go ahead.
All right. Well, I'm going to actually share my screen with you all. I have a small little presentation PowerPoint here, and I'm hoping that this all works. Let's see. Are you guys seeing the PowerPoint at this point?
We do.
Great. And are you also seeing the control panel on the side, or?
I don't.
There. You just see the PowerPoint? Perfect. Okay, great. Well, I will do just a quick personal introduction and let you all know that I am the Front Rooms Coordinator, which might not mean anything to you. The Front Rooms team is a team of individuals at Whitebird Clinic who provide basic needs supplies to folks, and we help connect individuals who come to our clinic with supportive services in the Eugene area. We've been doing that for since about 2015. We transitioned from being just an information and referral line to a more broader supportive service project through Whitebird, and I have been the program coordinator for about 3 years now. And as COVID-19 hit, we recognized that the community need was much larger than our normal scope of service, and so we decided to transition into becoming a distribution site for shelter-in-place materials. And we operated that way. We are continuing to operate that way, but we started that in about February. And then around April, the city of Springfield approached us to provide outreach services to the community of Springfield and our neighbors who are living outside. So we saw this as an opportunity to really support folks who are living outside, who are much more vulnerable than folks living inside, especially right now during the pandemic. And we saw this as an opportunity to get out and just provide supportive services and build relationships with people who are living outside. And we'll just move on here. So our main objective was to support the unhoused community during the COVID-19 pandemic. And in conjunction with Lane County Public Health and our medical clinic, we have put together information specifically for folks who are living outside, basically describing how to stay healthy and how to stay safe during the pandemic and what to do if you are experiencing symptoms. We've also been able to provide through the Emergency Operations Center the necessary shelter-in-place materials, which includes tents, sleeping bags, sleeping pads. We've provided food, propane tanks, clothing from our own inventory. And we've also been able to provide COVID-19 health screenings. We put together a very basic health screening with Lane County Public Health that basically anyone is able to provide to folks. You don't necessarily have to have medical training to provide these screenings. And so it was an opportunity for us to get out into the field, create relationships with people, and offer these very necessary things during this time. As we have expanded our services again after shutting down most of our services at Whitebird, we've also been able to provide information and referrals to community resources, including our own resources at Whitebird Clinic, which includes a medical clinic, a dental clinic. We have specific services that help folks sign up for benefits and maintain their benefits. And through this process, we've just been able to go out and evaluate specific needs and provide those supportive materials and those very specific referrals to community resources. So our outreach teams consist of 2 trained Whitebird staff. We've been going out Monday through Friday, and we've kind of been doing variable shifts just to basically meet the needs of our clients out there. Sometimes mornings work better for some folks and evenings work better for others. So we've really been trying to transition and figure out what the best way to serve our unhoused population out in Springfield. Really trying to provide a trauma-informed approach, seeing people in a holistic, their situations in a very holistic way, and trying to navigate those situations in a trauma-informed way, and really trying to meet people where they are at in the moment, and recognizing that each individual's experience is unique, and recognizing that each individual's past and history and a lot of different things come into play when we meet someone and we look and see what specific needs there are for that individual. So since I believe May 25th was our starting date, up until last week, I didn't include last week's statistics, but we've had 656 individual encounters with people in Springfield who are living outside. We've provided 204 referrals to Whitebird services, but also other community services in town. And we've provided 112 COVID-19 screenings. None of those were positive, by the way, so that's an excellent thing. So basically what our goal is as an outreach program is providing stability by meeting basic needs. We have seen from the beginning of our distribution sites, as well as other programs and projects that we have done in collaboration with the city of Eugene, that in order for folks to take control of their situation and find stability in their lives, they first need a strong foundation. And for many people, foundations, it means a different thing to each individual. But what we found is the important first steps in that is to be providing folks with their basic needs and help folks feel at least a sense of comfort in knowing that they have a safe place to lay their head down at night, and they will have a bite to eat each day, and they will have someone that comes out and that they trust, and they know that they can ask questions about services and get a really solid answer from them about what services could be provided to them. We know that building trust is a huge part of this process because, as we all probably know, there is a sense of distrust in the unsheltered population with different services and different systems. And we have really put an emphasis on creating trusting relationships with folks so that when they are ready to receive services, we can help guide them through that process and get them connected with the appropriate services. And it's a really empowering process to help our unsheltered neighbors get back on their feet and really provide them with a sense of empowerment that they can do this. They can get their needs met in their own way, and we're there to help guide them and help support them through that process. And so we're recognizing that, let's see, I'm gonna just do that. And you could stop sharing my screen at this point. There we go.
Thank you, Alex.
So,
Oh,
yeah,
okay.
you're welcome. Oh, no problem. So just recognizing that people who are living in unsheltered locations, they need access to supplies and information to enable them to not only shelter in place and stay in their current location, but also to protect themselves and protect the public. We need to slow the spread of COVID-19 throughout the community. And a huge way and a huge first step is providing support to those who are the most vulnerable in our communities. So thank you for your time. And I really just have appreciated working with Emily and Sandy and Neil. And I think there was one other person on here that Jeff, all of those folks have been extremely helpful throughout this process. And I've just really appreciated their tireless efforts in helping our unhoused neighbors. So thank you for your time. And I'm very willing to answer questions if you have any.
Thank you, Alice. I have a question from Marilee Woodrow. Counselor Woodrow, you're on mute. Is she on mute?
I got it.
There you go.
First, I think that you're kind of like a traveling triage. And I think that's great for being out there and trying to generate trust and with the needs and what you recognize and see. And the little help books that you're able to hand out too helps as well. I had a couple questions. One, it's fun at the moment. It's funded with CARES and FEMA funds. Do we know how long those will last?
I am not exactly sure how long those will last. That might be a question for either Neil or someone else in the EOC.
Okay. If would this be something that would be worthwhile considering to continue even past this particular funding?
So it seems that Cahoots started in Springfield in about 2015, if I'm remembering correctly. And as their call volume increases, the likelihood of kind of in response to community complaints and people who are seeing, maybe folks who are living outside and who might need some support. I really see this as kind of an alternative to, as well as having Cahoots in the neighborhoods, and just being able to have a more focused approach to people's situations and being able to spend a little bit more time and really provide a more in-depth information and referral process to folks. And so we've seen it benefit folks in Springfield, and we're seeing it benefit folks in Eugene as well.
Yeah, that's why I was asking, because I'm seeing a long range benefit as well, and that's why I was wondering what your assessment was as to the opportunity for, if we can, to be able to continue it beyond the current funding. So thank you.
Yeah, you're very welcome.
Counselor Woodrow, this is Newton. I'd like to answer your question regarding the funding.
Oh, okay.
So the CARES funding extends into the all funds must be expended by the end of the year. That's December 31st of this year. As far as the FEMA dollars, that really kind of depends on how long we are under emergency declaration with FEMA and regarding COVID. Certainly, I don't see that going away anytime soon, and we will continue to look for any external funding we can to keep this program going.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sherry, did you have a question? Because I can't see you.
Yes, I did have a question. I thought Leonard had a question as well.
It's possible. I just want to make sure I don't miss people up.
Okay, well, my question has to do with the percentage of folks that you're seeing in Springfield compared to the percentage in Eugene. I sometimes hear people say we don't have any unhoused in Springfield. I think they're not aware maybe of unhoused in Springfield, but so we're about the third the size of Eugene, and I wondered if that corresponds to the number of people that you are seeing and able to help.
So depending on the day at our distribution site in Eugene, we're seeing anywhere from 30 to 100 people a day. at our distribution site. And it's been reported that there are about 4,000 people who are living unsheltered in the Eugene and Springfield area. And as we have started to explore different areas in Springfield, we're finding more and more folks. And so we're recognizing that the unhoused problem is not just in Eugene. It's certainly present in Springfield, and these types of supportive services seem really necessary in helping folks.
Well, thank you. And I really appreciate hearing you say you're talking about providing a sense of empowerment to people and helping more than just their physical needs, but also their mental and emotional needs to help them stabilize. I really appreciate that as being a part of your program. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and go ahead, Mr. Leonard.
Thanks, Joe. So, Alex, thanks for this report. I think Whitebird has done a really good job of performing triage, as Councilor Woodrow says. What if Whitebird determines that the main medical need for a medically vulnerable person is shelter itself? What would you do to coordinate some sort of roof over their heads in the event of, say, a cold snap like we just had?
Well, it depends on the situation. If they're experiencing any sort of COVID-19 symptoms, we would refer them over to the River Avenue shelter that's currently being, let's see, when did they? I think they started just about 2 months ago. Occupy Medical has been in the process of providing support to folks who are experiencing symptoms. But shelter is a big topic right now, especially going into the winter months. And it's not necessarily something that Whitebird has approached in the past. We've helped place people in Conestoga huts around town, but we have never had a large scale shelter program. And so it's challenging for us to know exactly what to do in terms of providing folks with immediate shelter. However, we are able to connect them with case management services that we provide at our clinic on 12th and High in Eugene to get on central housing wait lists and connect them with community supported shelters and other programs in town who do provide shelter.
Yeah, I was aware that you don't have any kind of housing per se out of Whitebird. That's why I was asking who you coordinated with. That answers my question. Thanks.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Steer. If there's no more questions, we'll get back on the agenda. Alex, thank you so much for your information. We appreciate it. Keep working hard, and we will be back in touch, I'm sure.
Thank you for all of your time.
All right, take care. Have a good evening. Next item is going to be the housing and infrastructure discussion with Jeff Pascal and Sandy Belson.
All right.
All
right. Am I unmuted?
Yes, you are. We got you.
All right. Good evening, councilors. I'm Jeff Pascal, the city engineer, and I'm here this evening with Sandy Belson, the comprehensive planning manager. And we're going to discuss housing in the community and specifically the potential impediment infrastructure needs have in a project's viability. And then ultimately get direction from the council on the possibility of the lead role that the city could take in infrastructure and expansion to unserved areas. I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sandy to actually start out discussing and giving background on the housing needs, and then I'll come back in and follow up with some information regarding infrastructure.
I clicked to show my screen. Can you see it? Because it's not showing me that you're seeing it.
We're seeing
you see the connected to webinar.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, you're seeing what?
The GoToWebinar link.
Oh, well, that's not what I want you to see.
That would be my guess as well.
A map.
Do you see a map now?
Yes.
Great. Okay. Thank you. So as Jeff was explaining, we're bringing this item to you as an expansion of your potential strategies for housing. So we've been working on housing and providing more housing across the continuum of housing needs for the last 4 years. And so we're looking at other ways that we can continue to develop our housing strategy. And it seems that one way that we can do that to help private development actually produce more housing units in our community is to help address the financing burden of extending infrastructure. So this map is showing, in a general sense, the vacant and partially vacant land that is designated for residential use that is not served. And the big service that is required, the expensive one and the problematic one to extend really is the sanitary sewer that's within the city's control. There's also issues around stormwater and transportation, but in some cases, there might already be roads in areas, but not sewer. So that's the key service. And this map is showing you with these bubbles, different areas around the city that have land that could be developed if the infrastructure was available, there were willing property owners and the developers had a plan. So that kind of sets the stage. There are some areas within the city limits as well that are vacant. Generally, these areas have services nearby. And of course, we're looking at Marcola Meadows here, which is currently under development. That's another large area that is being built. So we wanted to see if there were ways that we could use existing funds that the city has on hand that Jeff can talk to more specifically to help make these properties more development ready. So with that, I'll turn it over to Jeff, and he can go into some of the financing options that we have and funds that are available.
Yes, thank you, Sandy. And if there are any questions, please jump in and just let me know if you have any questions while I'm going through this. And Sandy, please leave the map up. That's helpful. So when a developer walks in one of these properties that's out there, one of the things they're responsible for is all of the public facilities, those facilities which the city then would own: public streets, sewer, stormwater, lights, any of those sorts of things. They're responsible for paying for and constructing those as part of their development. Then the city would then take those on and they would become public infrastructure. And so it's pretty costly for developers to develop all of that within their property alone, let alone have to extend a sanitary trunk line or something like that to just get that to their property. And the city has put in place of several options to get those out there and for potential for those developers to get reimbursement. As an example, some of the councilors who've been on the council for a while might recall the Jasper trunk sewer. It was master planned. It was put in the master plan. It was in the master plan since 2004. Again, in 2008 was in the master plan, and that was a trunk line to extend from 42nd Street out Jasper Road and serve all of the Jasper and Natron area. And so you can kind of see all of that down in the southeast portion of Springfield, all that brown and green. Well, we've completed the first 2 phases at the direction of the council, putting that in the CIP, capital improvement program, and deciding to use bond funds and capital reserves to extend that to kind of spur development out in that area. And so what you see like down in the southeast, that would be phase 3 to serve that area. And so with that, the council, we've seen like 4 or 5 subdivisions come in that area, in those brown and green areas, and start to construct. And what we noticed is that project sat out there for a long time because it cost the city, I have the numbers here. So for the first 2 phases, the city invested $6 million, almost $7 million to construct that trunk line. And it was roughly 2 miles plus or minus of trunk line out there. And so you can imagine if you're a developer and you're out towards the end of that just adding that cost alone to get the sewer to your property and then develop your property, it's a pretty hefty burden. The city had a couple options. There were SDC credits that they could get if they constructed that as part of their project. And there were also reimbursement district, but the reimbursement district has a limited time. And so they're really dependent on other properties coming in and developing within a 20-year time frame to recoup the funds that they expend on that. And so I think what the city chose to do is extend that line using user fees. And then what we do is we charge an in lieu of assessment, and we've set up a special district so developers that access that line then pay their share. And so as we look at these 6 areas out here, by the end of 2023, we will have served all of Jasper and Natron because the council gave the go-ahead to put phase 3 of the Jasper trunk line into the capital improvement program, and then also the South 28th Street area. And the reason we're going to end up serving South 28th Street is because with the congestion mitigation, air quality funds, we're paving 28th Street, and we're just going to extend that sewer at the same time because we don't want to dig up the street once we pave it. So the sewer will be extended there. So we're going to use sewer user fees to extend the sewer in South 28th Street before we pave it. And so the discussion really lies with the council, and if they want us to come back and start discussing as part of the capital improvement program the potential for adding projects into the CIP for some of these other areas. A couple of the areas like the Willamette Heights, Doris Ranch area, the sewer line's in the ground. We have a pressure line in there and we have a gravity sewer line. What it requires is a pump station out there to connect all of that system up, and then it makes all of that area ready for annexation and development to urban level standard, similar to the area out by the hospital. And all of that's been master planned and is in the current wastewater master plan. Similarly, the East Springfield area out Main Street, we have several projects that are identified in the master plan and even in the CIP, unfunded currently, but for extending sewer out to those areas. So I think that's really where the discussion lies, and what we were seeking discussion with the council was the potential to use the reserves that the city has built up to extend those services to those areas and potentially spur or make more viable projects in those areas for housing.
Okay, I've got Councilor Steer followed by Councilor Woodrow.
Hey, thanks for the report, Jeff. So the developers in this southeastern quadrant, have they given you any sort of idea of what the value of these houses are going to be when they go up in the subdivisions?
No, they haven't. The last couple we talked to out at the end, they just were saying that they had developers. It was, I think, a spec person who was speculating, working for a property owner and speculating. Sandy and I actually met with them, and they were just saying that they were ready to go and looking for it, but they didn't give us any indication on what kind of developments they were looking at.
Okay, my level of support for extending public or city services to this subdivision would have a lot to do with the affordability of these properties. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilor Steer, and Councilor Woodrow. Go ahead.
Yes, they're plotted all over the outskirts of the city. In what order or how would you approach setting them up to do that?
I think that would be a conversation for future discussion as we came in with the CIP. I think what I would be seeking is, when Sandy and I talked about this, is if you would like, when I come back, because we're in a CIP planning year, capital improvement program planning year, where I would be updating the CIP with you, is bringing something maybe earlier rather than later to discuss potential projects and maybe what those the list of projects and then maybe what the criteria that we would be looking at. But I think we'd start with an internal discussion and bring some thoughts to the council to get your feedback on where your priorities and maybe what those criteria might look like.
Would you also consider the viability of areas that the developers have expressed an interest in?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, I think that's where we got to on the Jasper Natron, is we actually had developers coming in and asking, is the city willing to extend those services out there? That is one area where we have, we've extended the Jasper trunk line in 2 phases. And like I said, we've seen a couple, at least I was looking at about 4 subdivisions that have, come online since that first phase was in 2012. And so it takes time. And I think that's where the developers are always at. If you're at the end of the line and you extend that, what's the chance that you're going to recoup any of your $8 million that you expend on that in 20 years? And they're never going to get fully reimbursed. Whereas the city, we don't have a time frame. Eventually we will collect back the investment on behalf of the users, the citizens, at some point. And we can wait longer than most developers.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Jeff. And I have one question from Councilor Van Gordon, followed by Councilor Moe.
But the plan, right, the plan is to recoup these over time. Is that correct, Jeff? We're not just financing, financing development. As these properties come back online, they're going to essentially pay the citizens back, if you will.
Correct. Yeah, in essence, the city doesn't have a time limit on a reimbursement district we've done. We've done a couple of these. So Jasper Natron, we've constructed that out, and we've set a special district where we set a special rate for the in lieu of assessment because we know what the cost of the project was. Franklin Boulevard, we extended the McVeigh sewer out to the, out that area, and we're starting to see interest in development out there as well with that sewer out there. And we set a special rate because based on the cost of doing that project. So eventually, as all of those projects or all those properties that benefit from that project tie into that line, the city will recoup the funds that they expended for that project.
So, and we would get, it sounds like we would get additional information depending on us giving a little bit of a head nod tonight.
Yes, I think when I look to future budgets and allocation, right, one of our goals is preservation of our current assets and system. That is one of our main goals with our funds. And so I think with the reserves we have, it would be that balance to where we don't draw the reserves down so far that we're looking at, we're not going to go spend all $9 million on expanding the system and then be left with nothing in case we need to move forward on some rehab projects. So I think it would be bringing that balance to the council of, here are the list of projects and kind of here's a priority list so that we can balance revenues coming in and revenues going out so that we're never left with inadequate funds to manage the current system that we do own.
Yeah, and I think that would be the information that I would be interested in seeing. Us being able to finance and extend services to places that have got large vacant land to them will help drive additional housing units that we need. But I just would want to see the bigger picture of, how much do we think we could draw down? What is the potential impact to the ratepayers? Just some of the next level questions I think would be relevant.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that's all wonderful. We can bring that back as we work. And I think that's really kind of that discussion around the capital improvement program and where the council wants to move forward on the wastewater and potentially stormwater investments as well as we digest and look at some of the new requirements once our permit's approved. I think the other thing that that is to consider is the benefits to those property owners that may be in developments that were already built at county standards out in the UGB, because they're on septic systems now today, and we currently see coming in a handful of septic systems annually that are failing and they can't get permits to replace. I think the council's seen some of these where we've had to connect them on emergency basis. And the benefit to them is once the sewer's there, that's one less burden. Then rather than going through a whole PIP hassle or an emergency extension, it's there. They just have to annex and pay their plumbing fees and connection fees. And so there are some benefits, and I know there probably is some drawbacks as well to expanding in those areas within the UGB.
So Jeff, and I've got one other, I guess, question based on looking at the map. When you look around Mountain Gate, a large swath of that vacant land, is that big green blob there the Thurston Hills natural area, or is there a vacant land on the city side that could be developed?
I think there's some in there. I think Sandy was going to have the natural area taken off. I can't recall where that finally landed on the map and what version.
Okay.
Right. My understanding is that we have removed the Thurston Hills natural area, but that large green area that you're talking about does have some fairly significant slopes up there.
Okay, so it's not a giant area that we're suddenly going to crack ground and get 1,000 units in.
Well, I mean, with engineering, it's possible, but the practicality, not likely.
All right, thank you.
With enough money, you can build anything.
Okay, I can't see anybody right now. For some reason, all I have is
It
the
was
map in front of me.
Steve. Steve was next.
Steve.
I'm next.
Okay, all I see is a map. Sorry. Go ahead, Steve.
For coming from West Springfield, and I look at that map, I'm wondering why Glenwood is barely touched with what you think about the future. When Glenwood was put into the urban growth boundary, Mike Kelly jumped in there for some reason and put a trunk line down Franklin Boulevard, clear down and past with the Springfield bridges, then a few years later, extended it clear down to the Wilders properties. So the trunk line is in there. I don't know where that money came from. I always wondered about that. But why aren't we figuring on tapping off that going into the neighborhoods? There's houses there, but it's a redevelopment area, and we get sewers in there. It's going to be much more attractive to other people coming in there and building some good stuff.
I think that's a great question, and we have. I think when we looked at this, we were looking at large vacant land, and those would be partially vacant or already have houses. And you're right, there is some redevelopment, and we've actually had some developers come in on some of the properties out there, and one of the impediments is the main extensions from the trunk line, and those are all master planned, and the stubs are there. That would be a consideration the council could take, is extending those, and we have talked about that. It's just it hasn't been a council priority or position in the past, much like in North Springfield, to extend those mains off of those trunk lines into some of those areas. But that is something we could look at. Those are all local access roads, so kind of like our memo, it dictates. Most likely what we would have to do is just work with the county, and the county would gladly give up those LARs, those local access roads, to the city, and we would take that on and extend those sewers.
In CETA, spent $600,000 on the design of a parking structure. And I've actually asked Public Works to give me an idea of how much pipeline we could have put in for that $600,000. But CETA should still be looking at somehow maybe help funding those sewer lines. Another thing, a few years later after that trunk was put in, Mike Kelly went out and canvassed the area, held a meeting on trying to get people to annex, and he offered them a good deal on the from Springfield Bridge South. I think it was 18 cents a square foot. And then he also had a deal from the I-5 to the Springfield bridges. He presented that, and nobody took it, so they dropped it. And I think that 19 cents was a pretty good deal. I don't know why he dropped the rest of it, but I sure wish we would look at that to help encourage people to do the annexation.
Okay.
This is Sherry.
Okay, Sherry, followed by Councilor Steer.
Okay. Were you first, Leonard? Okay. Well, I had a question about, this looks great. I mean, I'm excited about the prospect and possibilities. My thought was when you're coming up with a little, further fleshing this out, looking at which one of these, or kind of listing these in prioritizing by how much use people would actually, what are the chances that it's actually going to be used, and the cost, because it looks to me like some of these might be much more costly than others. And then I wondered about the gray area out in the east that looks as if it's within the city limits. It's not just a UGB, but we don't provide sewer. Is that correct?
Are you talking about the light gray?
Yeah, the gray out in the east.
That is probably in some of those areas, even looking to the north, that may be residential land, but it's not considered vacant or partially vacant, and maybe Sandy can speak to that.
Right, there is property out there that's owned by the school district and Lama Lane, and so it's slated for other than residential. But I am wondering about the area south here, why that's not showing up. As you're mentioning that, Councillor Moore. So that might be something we can take another look at as well. And it could be that, we're building this map off of our residential lands and housing inventory. And so it could be that there's some reason in the methodology why that's not showing up, but I can look into that a little bit further.
Well, thank you for exploring this. This is just this is something I think we need to move forward on, because you're right. I mean, the cost of adding those sewer systems and then not knowing whether or not somebody's going to come along to help you pay for it is huge for a developer. Then my other question has to do with behind the hospital there, that green area. Is that hospital-owned property that they might develop into housing? At one time, I thought that was that was part of their plan.
So yes, that was part of their master plan. That master plan has now expired.
Okay.
In terms of the hospital area, I cannot say for sure that all of this area in green is still owned by the hospital. I'd have to look into that.
Okay. Well, that was just a great idea. Thank you very much for bringing this forward.
Thank you, Sherry. Councillor Steer.
Yeah, I was just looking at the action that's requested. So what we're being asked to do now is just approve conceptually the use of user fee capital reserves for the possible extension of public utilities out to these new subdivisions. Is that correct?
Correct. So I think what I would be looking for from the council is potentially looking at these areas, if the council's in agreement that this concept works, is looking at these areas and looking at the projects and possibly both stormwater and wastewater, what the needs are through the master plans or other plans that we may have, and maybe coming back to the council sooner than the one work session we typically have with the capital improvement program, to go through, look at the projects, prioritize, give the pros and cons, and kind of maybe a hierarchy of what would be the best order to tackle these in, or looking at it, what areas may be riper for development kind of thing, but that's still looking at our crystal ball. But bring that back earlier than our one work session, so that then I can take that back and take any conversation or any comment I get back from the council and kind of have more time to put that into the final draft, or the next draft that would then come back to the council for approval to the public hearing.
Okay. Well, assuming that the criteria are going to include the practicality and cost effectiveness of extending the utilities to the development in question, and also the affordability of the housing that's going up, then I would certainly be in favor of this idea conceptually. Thanks.
Thank you, Leonard. And I think, Jeff, in the interest of moving on a little bit, we got, correct me if I'm wrong, Council, everybody likes this. Everybody is supporting it.
Yes.
My own opinion
Yes.
is that I completely support this. It's a long time coming. I appreciate folks finally getting down and saying, hey, we got some extra capital money here in reserves, and they're coming from SDCs. So that's what they're for. And they need to expand our horizons a little bit and use this money the way it's meant to be. And I agree, Jeff, to leave some in reserve, but let's look at using it for these purposes. And you're right, nothing's going to develop if they don't have the right performa. And this is the #1 killer right here. So I completely agree. And I see Councilor Moe with his hand up.
When you're ready, I'm ready. Okay.
Oh.
As I've said before, I've been hearing for years and years and years about what an emerald Glenwood is, but we continue to pass it up. And in this case, it appears that we're trying to do that too. And I'm going to be on it, man. That's one of my goals as a counselor, is to do as much good for Glenwood as I can. And putting sewers in is one of the first things we need to do.
Yeah, I agree, Jeff. I'm sorry, I agree, Steve. But this particular place is identifying unreserved vacant residential lands as opposed to what needs service. And so I think there's going to be two different purposes, and I concur with what you're saying. We need to look at who needs service and what we can do to make that happen. But as far as new developable lands, this is what this topic is about, what those SCC monies would be for. So with that, I think you got enough from us, Jeff? It sounds like you do.
I do, and I think what I hear is this probably warrants a more detailed capital improvement discussion, like I said, about probably around sewers and stormwater extension and perhaps expansion of the system, and I can also incorporate, we do have a project in the CIP currently, Councilor Moe, that is local sewer extensions, which would be more akin to what you're looking for in Glenwood. And we can have that conversation again with council. The typical direction is to keep that in serving, because we do still have areas within the city that folks who are in the city limits annexed who are on septic and not served. But the intent with that was extending more of those mains into those neighborhood type settings to folks who aren't served, but maybe not these large tracts of lands that are developable. So we can also discuss that at that same time, and maybe what the purpose is behind that CIP project, and incorporating more of these areas like what you're discussing with Glenwood.
Thank you.
Okay. I think go forth and conquer, Jeff.
All right, I will look for some time in the earlier late winter, early spring before we come in our typical March. Thank you.
All right, take care. Have a good evening.
You too. Bye.
Next on the agenda is the budget check-in with Nathan Bell.
All right, I'm going to take advantage that there's actually a spot open up here on the screen. So good evening, Council. The last few years, we've brought to you a 5-year general fund forecast in October as we begin to kick off our budget cycle, to bring you the context of the budget cycle that we'll be addressing and some of the challenges that we're facing. The general fund is the primary funding source for a number of core services that are very important to our community, that our community has come to rely on, and is funded primarily through property taxes. Property taxes have not kept pace with inflation over the years, and so this has been a challenging fund for us. And from the 5-year forecast, I think you can see that continues. You've heard me speak to this in the past, and that is, what is a healthy reserve? And we've kind of set a range of a healthy reserve of 20 to 25%. That's 20% is the floor of what we consider a healthy reserve. So when you dip below that, that can become problematic. And why that reserve is important is that's what provides the cash flow or funding from July 1st, the beginning of the fiscal year, through November, when the current year property tax receipts start to come in. So, looking at the forecast, and when you look at those outer years and you see that reserve, dip all the way down to zero, what that effectively means is we don't have the cash to fund the first 4 months of services before our property taxes would come in. What a business would do in a situation like that is they would probably turn to a bank for a revolving loan. But that also takes away our cushion in terms of, revenues and expenditures don't always behave exactly as we forecasted them to. What's more is it also would result into where you had to create a budget that was exactly equal to or less than the current year property tax revenues. That being said, we would never let ourselves get into a situation where that reserve would dip down to 0%. And that's part of the reason we're having this conversation this evening. If you look at fiscal year 22, you can see that the reserve gets to 19%. That's just below that healthy level. When I look at that, and I think to myself, and we're just beginning the budget cycle, that's doable. We can find a way still to bring that back up into the healthy reserve level. It is concerning, though, that we have forecasted at this point in fiscal year 22 a 1.6 million expenditures over revenues and overspend. This is the result of PERS increases that are happening in 22. As you remember, the PERS increases come biannually. The last one we had was in fiscal year 20, and the next one we'll have is in fiscal year 22. It levels off for a year, and then we see another increase in fiscal year 24. Looking at fiscal year 22, I think we can safely anticipate that we're going to have budget reductions to balance that budget or bring it into a healthy reserve range. And I think we can also get fiscal year 23 close as well, but that only buys us time in the short term. It really doesn't address that long-term structural deficit that persists. The other thing I think worth noting is that we just went through a budget reduction exercise this past spring in response to the pandemic's impact on our finances. And one of the things that we recognized was that we are a lean organization at this point, and we are getting to a point where it's becoming challenging to find budget reductions that don't impact outward-facing services. So what we'd like to do is while we work on the coming year budget and that short-term solution, we really need to start working on that long-term solution simultaneously, as that long-term solution isn't going to just be a one-year project. It's going to span multiple years. And looking at that long-term structural deficit, we're at a point where we really need to start looking at revenues, whether it be increasing existing revenues or implementing new revenues, or expenditure budget reductions that have a corresponding impact on outward-facing services. It's likely that it's going to take a combination of all of those to address this structural deficit. And so we're here this evening to ask you for guidance on where you would like to put our energies initially in addressing that, and what kind of balance between the two you would feel most comfortable with. So go ahead, Marilee.
You're probably going to go into it, but my question was, what are the options of long-term?
Long-term in terms of what types of revenues or expenditure cuts?
Right.
We haven't gone there. And this is an exercise that we're going to want to do with you. Without getting too far ahead of myself, on the revenue side, Salem here back in 2018 implemented a sustainable services revenue task force, and it was made up of council-appointed members that comprised of counselors, budget committee members, and community members. And they were looking for sustainable revenues. And I think that sustainable is the word, in that as long as our property taxes have a collar around them and they don't keep pace with our expenditure inflation, we really need to look to revenue sources that track inflation. So we're not looking to solve this problem tonight. We're really just looking to start the process and get some guidance from you on where you would like us to focus our energy and how you would like to focus that energy. And then this will be a multi-year project that will involve us working with you closely, most likely through many work sessions to come up with solutions.
Yeah, that was pretty much my question, was where do we begin to take a look and see what's available and what's out there? Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilor Stair? Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor
You want to be
Pashari.
calling? All right,
I'll let you
go
call
ahead.
it.
Microphone.
We can't hear you.
You're on mute, Leonard.
Sorry about that. Okay. So I wanted to just ask, it looks to me like right now our cash reserves are in the neighborhood of 10 million-ish. And by the fiscal year 26, we're looking at virtually zero cash reserves. Is that right?
If we were to do nothing.
Right. Okay. Well, I mean, this is certainly subject to discussion, but I'd like to explore new revenue streams if we could, and that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilor Steer. And
I have
Sherry,
a
do you have your
question.
hand up?
Yes,
There
I
you
do.
go. Yep.
Thank you. So it seems to me I remember about 2012. I don't know. When was it we were going through this whole process after after 2008, we lost revenue. We had to make up and we cut staff. I remember going through that process of actually looking at how slim a staff we could get. So my question is, have we recovered from that? What level are we at now? I mean, we're not looking back far enough from this budget to see, but at that time, I remember how awful it looked, and we weathered through, and it wasn't easy, and we made a lot of cuts, I recall. But have we regained and come back up from that time, or are we still, did we never really fully recover? I guess that's part of my question.
Okay. So I don't have it here, but there's a slide that I use during the first budget committee meeting, and as part of my presentation, that shows the FTE reductions we made during that recession, in response to that recession. And then it shows that we've slowly recovered that FTE up until the current year. But then when we impose population growth, because that's what drives our service level responses over that recovery, what we discovered is that those reductions that we made back during the recession essentially flatlined when you factor in population growth. So the short answer is no, but it's more complicated than that. Having been present through that period, also from earlier years, for a number of different reasons, we had some reserves in different funds that resulted, the ambulance fund at one time had very strong reserves. From the sale of the sports complex, we had money in Fund 420. From the sale of the Bancroft lots, we had reserves and funds. Booth Kelly was a cash generator for us for many, many years, partially because we haven't put any money back into building preservation of that facility, just pulled it out. And we've used that money in addition to small cuts, just nibbling around the surface to balance our budget year after year after year, but always a short-term solution, never a long-term sustainable solution. From my perspective and what we're looking at, and if you want to get into the assumptions, I think it might also help you out with the context here, is we are really coming to the end of the runway, and we need to make some structural changes, whether that be new sustainable revenue sources or something else bold that I'm just not coming up with at this moment. We're going to really have to be creative, think outside the box, and put our heads together.
Gosh, thanks. But I do recall that it seemed like really dark days. We did get through, maybe by the skin of our teeth, but I have all sorts of faith. Thank you very much, Nathan, for bringing this, sort of arousing us early on. I'm not going to be around to help you guys solve this issue, but thank you for making us aware. I really do appreciate that.
Okay, thank you, Councilor Moore. I have Councilor Van Gordon next.
Well, Nate, and maybe a little bit of context from your perspective may help here. If we come up with a long-term structural fix, we're still always going to be working on balancing the budget. Is that correct?
Well, we'll balance the budget forever. I mean, we all do it in our own lives every year. But I think what you're really getting at is, let's say we were to address and fix this 5-year structural imbalance here in the next couple of years, and we're like, okay, we got ourselves to where we're back to a sustainable point. Measure 5 and 50, which were those property tax initiatives that put a collar around our property tax revenues, will put us right back in this position a decade from now, unless we're able to come up with a more sustainable revenue source. And I know that this is sort of what's the word, hush word, or never say in the state of Oregon. But when you think about a sustainable tax source, sales tax, I'm not suggesting, I just want to say sales tax keeps pace with inflation. And so something like that provides you with the income tax, does that as well. Property tax could do that through appreciation, but because of just the unique dynamics in the real estate market of Oregon and the migration of folks in and the appreciation, the significant appreciation that we've seen in this state over the past decades, we saw a little bit of revolt of the taxpayer, and they collared the increase that we can have on property tax revenues. That has made it uniquely challenging for us to fund government services that need to keep pace with inflation.
Right, and I think that's an important point to make for the public while we're all just friends here talking, is that all big organizations face the same thing 5 years, 10 years out. Is they're always dealing with the pressure of their revenues keeping up with the pace of their expenditures. So even if we come up with something tomorrow, like we're still going to be talking about this in a couple of years down the road, always looking forward. I like having the 5-year forecast. I think that helps a ton. And I'm going to tell you that I think I'm open to having more broad discussions about how we find something structural. I don't know where that would lead, right? But I think at this point, we don't need to limit ourselves by artificially taking something off the table. That's just too early in the process. The points that I think are important that are business decisions that's in here, you always bring back the 5-year forecast with an assumption of the general fund subsidizing the ambulance fund. And I don't know what the solution is long term, but it is an enterprise fund. So like ideally, if we could, broaden that conversation to see what else we can do with the ambulance fund to draw down that deficit, that's going to help our general fund a lot, because a majority of the money that you're planning on expending is really going back into the ambulance fund to sort of subsidize that fund. The other point that I think is sort of valid here is you still drop off the money that we should be spending in deferred maintenance. So this isn't really representative of all those things we should be doing. This is just how do we keep the lights on? And I think it's really critical that we start talking to citizens and among ourselves about, not only do we have to figure out how to keep the lights on, but we have to figure out how to do all these sort of structural things to keep, the building maintained and those types of things. And I think the last point, and this is a really, I think, critical point, which is don't just look at revenue and costs. Right? Look for, either arbitrage, places that you can move money around. The answer that I keep coming back to is in your financial forecast, according to the last budget, we have a huge increase related to Cahoots that is built into the budget as a service that we need going into the future. When you talk to the Whitebird folks, right, the Whitebird folks are telling us that the basic model at the state level and state funding could change around Cahoots. So when we talk about our financial picture, I think in those types of work sessions, I think pulling out those places where we can be better advocates as a city to make sure that we shore up our financial picture would be helpful as well. So I guess think about it more. I'm supportive of thinking about it more broadly than just simply, we got to find something to tax or have a fee on, or, something to cut. And I'm going to recognize that, looking at this deficit, there's some big, probably structural changes that are going to be proposed. And I think, especially now, right, we got to start talking about those soon, and we got to be willing to consider them.
Yeah, I'm glad you pointed out that we aren't contributing to capital replacement beginning in fiscal year 22, and that's a problem. We really just started saving for that in fiscal year 20, and we managed to save for 2 years, but we're kind of back to that point where then that's come out of the budget, and that's troubling because we have a lot of deferred maintenance here at City Hall, and we also have a Justice Center now that is well over 10 years old, maybe 12, 13 years old. But it's getting to that point where we're going to start seeing some capital replacement needs over there as well. You're right about cahoots. We've started in fiscal year 22. Right now, we contribute 25%, and there's a subsidy of 75% that passes through the county. It's been signaled that reduces to us to 50% in fiscal year 22, and that's what this budget reflects. But you, as the governing body, that's an area where you could potentially have influence. And then lastly is in looking at different ways to kind of solve this. We aren't looking at purely from just reduce expenditures or find new ways to create revenue through taxes and fees. Later this evening, you're going to have an important conversation in your CETA meeting regarding economic development. And I'm partnering very closely with Courtney in looking for economic development as another way to help our budget structural deficit, and being creative within that realm as well.
Well, thanks, Nate. I know we're all going to depend on Courtney to save us all. And I think it's just important that we keep bringing the conversation about the nuts and bolts of the budget sort of up and give it some sort of context, because we're going to have to work on this more than just pluses and minuses on the actual financial sheet. It's going to have to be policy. It's going to have to be additional funds. It's going to have to be restructured. It's going to have to be a lot of different things.
Thank you, Councilor Van Gordon. So I've got a few comments as well, Nate. It's a little discerning to see this, but it's not the first time we've seen this type of projection. Like you said, you lay it out there every October, and I can't remember since 2004 that any of your October forecasts have been bright and sunny. Actually, we seem to always be trying to figure out, okay, how are we going to make it the next 5 years? And it just doesn't seem like we've had truly flush years, and I think it's because of those property tax relief bills that have come across, and it's automatically throwing all of us into trying to figure out how we're going to survive. So I'm very interested. I appreciate you bringing this up. I'm very interested in seeing what ideas staff have in regards to potential revenue streams.
We lost you, Councilor Pictionary.
My computer says he's still talking.
Who's our backup?
I believe that's Councilor Woodrow. This is Nancy.
I don't, we must have lost him out in the mountains.
This is Nancy. My suggestion would be to move forward. Hopefully we can reestablish a connection with Councilor Pictionary, and in the interim have Councilor Woodrow assume the control of the meeting.
Okay. Were there any of, I think Joe was kind of summing up with it. Go ahead, Nate.
Well, I do want to touch on some other things in regards to this forecast, because I think there's sort of also a general sentiment that I've heard in the past that we bring something like this forward that shows that sort of outward year scenario where there's a challenge, yet we seem to balance the budget year after year, and this never comes to fruition. And so one of the things that, in looking at that, there's a number of reasons why that's happened in the past. And it's not that anything was done wrong in the past, but it was just the way that budget was built. And So we've kind of made some changes to where I think there's a tendency, just human nature, to be very conservative in your estimates. That's one of the reasons. Another reason is that you set your budget to make sure that your expenditures would never exceed your legal appropriation, and that's by department. So you have to do that in 10 to 12 different departments. And what you end up with is underspend. And typically, we come under our forecasted expenditures by about $800,000 each year. So in putting this together, we built that underspend into this forecast. But additionally, in looking at these revenues, we actually tried to say, okay, we've got some enterprise zone exemptions that are expiring and some property that's coming onto the tax rolls beginning in 23. Those include both Swanson's and IP. A good proportion of both of them will come on in 23, and then a smaller but still significant portion will come on in 24. Additionally, you're familiar with the Marcola Metals development, and we tried to anticipate the valuation that will come onto our property tax rolls over the next 4 years, including that development. And so when we were coming up with our property tax forecast, we started by looking to the county. They put forward some guidance, especially based on the impacts they're expecting of COVID on property tax revenues. And let's just say it was a very conservative, I think, kind of scary guidance. And it essentially had our property taxes increasing by 3% in fiscal year 22, because we wouldn't yet feel the impacts or fully feel the impacts of COVID-19, but thereafter essentially 0% increases over the following 3 years. And we knew that that was put together as a one size fits all, and that every community is made up of a different mixture of whether it be residential, commercial, or industrial, and has its own unique things happening. So we dug into those unique items for our community. And in our property tax forecasts, and we hope that they're very realistic forecasts, they're not overly conservative, but they're not overly optimistic. And in fiscal year 23, we have property taxes increasing 3.2% over the prior year. In 24, 4% over the prior year. In 25, 5% over the prior year. And in 26, 5.5% over the prior year. Those are significant property tax increases. But with both the enterprise exemptions expiring and that Marcola Metals development, we think those are realistic projections. We also did put in conservative projections for personnel service increases over the coming years. And what that really means is, as an organization, we need to hold our personnel cost to inflation. One area that we don't have control over is our PERS contributions. Those rates are set by the state. But, at the table with our bargaining groups, and focusing on this community and our budget and our ability, we need to make sure that we've got fair contracts, but also contracts that are sustainable for this organization. So this is what we consider to be a very realistic projection. We are not trying to err on one side or the other. And for the reasons is that when you're looking at making budget reductions, I don't want an overly conservative projection that leads to reductions that didn't need to be made in the first place. But at the same time, as someone who's responsible for this budget, I also don't want to be so rosy that I have to come back to you later and say, we got it wrong.
Right.
Any other questions on those assumptions?
Steve.
I have the annual report for the fire department 2019. I don't have the current one. In that, Springfield's fire, part of that was $20 million. Does that come out of this 5-year forecast, or is that another fund?
The fire budget?
Yeah.
The fire budget touches 3 funds. It primarily is funded through the general fund, but we also have the special operating levy that funds a portion of that 5th fire station, which is actually on the ballot next week. Yeah. And then we also have the ambulance fund, which funds our ambulance services. Now recognize that the ambulance fund and those ambulance services also are part of our first response, our minimum requirements for first response. So even if we were to discontinue transport, there's a good portion of that ambulance fund personnel expenditure that would come back into the general fund, so we could still meet our requirements for first response.
Yeah, I'm not questioning that. I'm just trying to understand this a little bit better. I see the $40 million $42 million on the budget here, how much of that actually goes into this? And I know this is supplemented by other monies, but.
Yeah, off the top of my head, I think the of this 42 million, the fire budget is somewhere in the neighborhood of 12 to 13 million.
Okay, thank you. That helps me a lot.
Anybody else?
This is Sherry. I just would like to add that I think that in looking at the budget, we still need to always consider the livability of our area. And I'm very thankful that our school district and Willamette Lane seem to be relatively well funded at the moment. And those provide a lot of livability. But I guess I'm thinking, I don't ever want us to be able have to pull in our belt strings so tight that we remove some of what makes Springfield so absolutely amazing and great, the services that we provide, the joy that we provide to our citizens who live here. And so just, keeping that in mind, that we need to be frugal, but we also need to have cake once in a while.
Sean.
Nate, I don't know if you've got more information. My understanding is that Sub and Willamette Lane are still, Willamette Lane and the school district are experiencing significant budget issues as part of this too. They're basically in the same boat.
Right. Yeah.
I don't have a lot more information on those two. I think though is similar, especially for Willamette Lane that has their activity center and the impact the social distancing has had on that. We have very different revenue sources. Ours will be impacted more in the long term. Theirs were impacted immediately. When things get back to normal, I think they'll be able to recover faster, and we'll see kind of I think a longer drag.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of work to do here, and I appreciate you guys bringing it up. And I don't want to lose this. It was my take as far as 2 cents goes, because I think it's a huge issue we're facing.
Hopefully I didn't miss anything big.
You got all the homework.
I thought, what I get signed up for? So I probably just more of the same as what I'm guessing, Sean.
Yes.
Okay. Nate, do you have enough from us?
Yeah, I believe so. It sounds like you're open to both the not taking anything off the table,
Right.
considering both revenues and expenditures that could have outward-facing service level impacts, as well as being creative and thinking outside the box and coming up with other solutions outside of those two realms. Do you want us to treat everything equally, or would you like us to put a little more energy into one area initially as we get this off the ground?
My personal preference, and I think that council's operated like this in the past, it may be easier, but everybody else obviously can chime in, is provide a list of where are some cuts that could be made, or some savings, I guess, or reduction in costs for savings, and then another list of possible increases of revenues, and that so the council can look at both sides of that. And I think you could literally create a spreadsheet that has those different items on that spreadsheet, and it'll have a running total at the bottom of cost reductions and then revenue streams, and then you can have a change of the total at the bottom. And I think that type of working spreadsheet may be pretty helpful.
We'll definitely be having a list of potential reductions just coming through as part of this regular budget process for fiscal year 22 over the coming months. On the revenue side, it's something where we can just look to different types of revenues that other municipalities have implemented. We could also look to Salem to see what the results were from the Sustainable Revenue Task Force that they put together. Or the other question is, would you like to consider doing something similar in regards to a Sustainable Revenue Task Force that involved, in addition to council, budget committee, and community members?
I frankly am open to both, but it seems like if we create another committee or task force, it kicks the can down the road longer than we need to be. I'll get you, Sean, in a second. And then also, but I think we need to think out of the box, and that's why, you know, possible revenue streams is where people can say, hey, we got a blank slate. What are your ideas? I know that our city across the freeway came up with some ideas recently that didn't set well with us because it's not applied correctly, I should say, at least to Springfield citizens. They're paying taxes over there on their payroll and get basically nothing in return for their taxes. So there's a lot of ways we can look at it, but anyway, I'm open for whatever ideas people come up with. Go ahead, Sean.
I could be in favor of taxing Eugene's payroll to pay for our government.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Let's all raise your hands. Let's start taxing them. All right.
I think I would hold off on maybe the citizen committee until we get the first set, like the first conversation, you know, back, you know, after all of this, because I think it's a little bit early. I'm open to doing it if it's going to be a big, you know, if it's going to be a big lift, but I would think another conversation would make sense.
Okay.
I don't think we're ready for it yet.
Yeah. And then too, we can come up with a list of things that, hey, possible revenue streams, then have a task force look at that and say, okay, how are we going to do these? But I don't think I would want a, you know, ad hoc committee start that road or that work before we weighed in.
Okay.
All right.
I think I've got direction.
Perfect.
If I may, this is Nancy again.
Oh, sure, Nancy, go ahead.
Thank you. I appreciate Nathan's presentation tonight. That's why I wanted it on your agenda. You know, fairly early in the process of discussing the budget, we will also be giving a similar presentation to our employees, so they have an appreciation of why the city will be needing to make the decisions, particularly the council and staff. Additionally, this year I'm going to be meeting with every department with budget staff and budget staff and city management office staff will be meeting with every department to discuss their, you know, not just the upcoming fiscal year budget, but what are the challenges that they see coming as we are projecting out, and what are the things that we need to be keeping in mind as we craft our policies in the future. For instance, I think about our infrastructure with buildings. You know, that one weighs heavily on my mind. You know, we can look at how old our fleet is, how soon that needs to be replaced. We can look at some of the internal services that we provide. Are there ways that we can be doing them differently? So there are conversations I'm going to be having with the department directors. I don't think that this has been a real standard practice in the city, but it's something I'd like to do just to keep that top of mind awareness of not just the budget, but also our fiscal condition throughout the year. That's all I have.
Makes sense to me. Thanks, Nancy. I think we're all pretty well have waded in on this. And Nate, I think you've got enough to roll on it.
I do. Thank you.
All right. So with that, I'm going to adjourn the council work session and allow people to sign out and then to sign back in for the CETA, the Springfield Economic Development Agency meeting.